We all know those GLP-1 injections work wonders, but that price tag almost gave me a heart attack when my insurance denied coverage. I was staring at a choice between paying my mortgage or paying for weight loss. Talk about a rock and a hard place. Then I found Elevate Health compounded semaglutide at just $58 with payment plans that don't require a second mortgage. Same medication, same results, but a price that real folks can actually afford. Visit joinelevate.com today. That's JOINELEVATE.com. Your wallet will be as happy as your waistline. This medication is not FDA approved.
Hello, my name is Kevin Tudor, and I'm one of the 3 hosts of Almost Major, a film podcast dissecting many major indie studios and the films they release. Every week, myself, Charlie Nash, and Bryden Doyle discuss overlooked, forgotten, or bona fide classic indie films via studio-specific miniseries. We've previously covered numerous films from Artisan Entertainment, Lionsgate Films, and New Line Cinema. Titles including The Blair Witch Project, American Psycho, Dogville, But I'm a Cheerleader, Saw, Requiem for a Dream, and Ringmaster, you know, the Jerry Springer film. Anyways, we have a fun time every week and we hope you will join us. Subscribe to Almost Major wherever you get your podcasts. Now proudly a part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hello and welcome to Tumbleweeds and TV Cowboys. My name is Hunter. In this podcast, I'll be joined by a different guest each week to discuss a classic Western movie or TV show. I've been a fan of classic Westerns for as long as I can remember, and in recent years, they've become very nostalgic for me. I love the aesthetic, the tropes, and I love seeing different filmmakers' takes on them. At their best, they're incredibly entertaining, rewatchable, and some of my all-time favorite movies are Westerns. We'll mostly focus on Western movies made in Hollywood, but we'll also be covering spaghetti Westerns, and one thing I'm very excited to get into are Western TV shows. I've got some amazing guests coming on the show, film professors, historians, and podcasters. And Tumbleweeds and TV Cowboys is part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, and many guests on the show will be from other shows on the network. Thanks for listening.
The Projection Booth podcast is sponsored by Scarecrow Video. Try out Scarecrow's rent-by-mail service. Choose from over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Visit scarecrow.com today.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Sebe Ezra Goodman. A toto je moje dcera Winifred.
A mě říkají limonádový Joe.
A mě? Arizonská pěnice. Tornádo Lou. Umělkyně.
Arizona, to je pravých mužů zóna. Karty, šustí, kulky, psučí, krávici tu plně učí.
Ano, Hogofogo. Z 12 zářezy na pažbě svého Deringeru. Hogofogo? Hledaný policií 5 států.
A zatčený ve Stepson City.
Tu láhev barculatou, tu pestrou vinětu, tu whisky tmavě zlatnou, pije i manitu. Kdo chce se stát mužem, ten whisky pije rád a proto všichni může společně zaspívat.
Dovolte, abych vám představil své spolupracovníky. Kojot Kid, Pancho Kid.
Nestojím o vaše kidy.
Já jsem totiž tuplovaný kruťas. A mučeníčko, to je moje potěšeníčko. A proč bych tím šampionem nemohl být já? Horác Badman, majitel po čertech prosperujícího podniku Trigger whisky salonu. Proč?
Jen když je to
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Join me once again is Mr. Jonathan Owen.
Hello, good to be here.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Alistair Pitts.
Hello, Mike. Kolalok is the law.
Czechtember continues with a look at Oldřich Lipský's Lemonade Joe, based on the novel and play by Jiří Brdečka. The film stars Karel Fiala as the titular Lemonade Joe, a seller of Kolalok Cola. Meanwhile, Miloš Kopecký plays the dreaded Horác Badman, a.k.a. Hogofogo. It's a tongue-twisting Czech musical presented in stunningly tinted black and white, done only as Oldřich Lipský can do. Be warned that we are going to be spoiling this film as we go along, so if you don't want anything ruined, turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen the film. Little Sheba, we will still be here. So, Jonathan, when was the first time you saw Lemonade Joe, and what did you think, sir?
I think I first saw it in early 2008, and it was at a time when I'd just finished my postgraduate research on Czech cinema, and I was waiting for my Viva. I was going to have like a Viva kind of exam, and so I was like desperately cramming lots and lots of films that I'd not seen during the Christmas break, and this was one of them. It was a bit belated, really, because I think I really should have seen it earlier, and I was watching a lot of things in a bit of a panic. Even despite the circumstances, this was one that I just immediately loved on first viewing. And I think I probably watched it through. I probably went back a couple of days after and just watched it again just for pleasure, because it just immediately clicked with me. And yeah, it's just so much fun. And it's a film that I've watched many times since then. And one of those things that I can always just watch a few minutes of, just get an instant pleasure hit from it. Yeah, it's a film I love, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, this movie's like a dopamine rush.
Yeah.
And Allie, how about yourself?
Because Letterboxd, I know exactly when I saw it, and that was the 15th of February this year. But it had been on my radar for like years and years before that. And in part because of that, I think it slightly suffered from being like so anticipated. Oh, I'm finally going to watch this thing that I've heard about for 6, 7, 8 years at this point. And it was just coming as part of a very intense weekend of film watching. In fact, I borrowed it on DVD from 20th Century Flicks video rental in Bristol, one of the last surviving video rental places in the UK, because I just happened to be in Bristol really for the first time for Slapstick Festival. And so I'd seen a bunch of like Soviet silent film slapstick on the Friday, come back to Oxford with my small handful of DVDs, because 20th Century Flicks does a rental service. So I was just like, oh, okay, I will take these with me. So I got 3. So it was part of a trio of I Married a Witch, the Veronica Lake film, and Sword of Doom. So that was quite an eclectic mix. And then I saw it the day before I saw Once Upon a Time in... No, it wasn't Once Upon a Time in the West. Yeah, it was Once Upon a Time in the West for the first time as well. I enjoyed it, but it got lost in the shuffle. And also seeing it on DVD rather than seeing it on a nicer print, I think it didn't quite live up to my expectations the first time, but just revisiting it on a nicer copy and in a slightly less like frazzled state of mind, it's just grown with every subsequent rewatch. So I am really excited to talk about this too.
Yeah, this one was part of a whole series of movies that Facets released here in the States. Facets out of Chicago. Yeah, I had this all the way back on VHS, I think. They released, I don't know how many titles, but it was very unusual for this video company to release all of these Czechoslovakian films. And of course, they had a lot of the classics that we know, Closely Watched Trains over here, Closely Observed Trains over there. but Lemonade Joe was one of them. And I was just like, what is this thing? This musical Czech cowboy film? And it was very unusual for me because I really wasn't that familiar with other countries and how they did cowboy films other than the spaghetti westerns. I wasn't aware of Tears of the Black Tiger hadn't come out. The Thai, I believe it was Thai musical, also a western. Watching this the first time, I was completely blown away. Just the manipulation of the footage, just to see the tinting of everything. And sometimes the tinting is so intense, and maybe because of watching this on VHS the first time, it was really tough to see sometimes what was going on. And even the version I watched again for this recording, little tough sometimes, like when he goes to Fata Morgana Valley and you have things up in the sky and you can barely make out what's going on. And then you definitely see when he gets a vision of what's happening with his love interest in Hogofogo. But yeah, there are certain times, especially like the street, where you just have that long version. And amazing that they have this Western set at Barrendov. I guess they must have shot a lot of cowboy films there because it was a great set. And this movie plays with tropes like nobody's business. Like almost anything you can think of when it comes to a cowboy film, it's in this. Like all of the standards. It's almost the greatest hits of Westerns.
And right from the start, right? Like the fact that you've got this great title song in both, because we'll probably end up talking about like the English dub, which is shorter. It's really a labor of love, and they go to the trouble of rewriting or just writing songs to replace the originals that just so like authentic, but just so funny and just so much in the lyrics. And you can tell in a way that it was a stage musical before, in the sense that the script is so tight. And the thing about, if you're putting something on, and this is like true of Shakespeare, is part of the reason it's so good is you get like multiple bites at the apple, because like you could just keep tightening the script. And I feel like maybe that's what happened. I have no evidence for that, but just it does seem like something that has just been like fine-tuned and just like extra little jokes just added in, and just so good.
I was really surprised to find out how long of a prehistory it has, really, because I think it goes back to basically to the end of the 30s. I think Brdečka was basically commissioned to write a series of like Western themed stories for a magazine. And so I think it was first published, or I think he first wrote them around like 1939, 1940, and then it went through these various other versions. So there was a play that was produced, I think, in 1944 during the occupation still, which is amazing, I think. And then there was a novel.
To go back to Closely Observed Trains.
Yeah.
This is what he was doing.
There was, I think, a radio version. Of course, there's the Jiří Trnka film, Song of the Prairie, which is not exactly the same story or characters, but it like a trial run in a way, I guess, for the idea of doing a comedy Western. And that's where the title song first appears. And then there was the 1955 stage production, which I think was a rewrite, basically. And that, I think it's at that point that they added the music. So I think it's at that point that it became a musical. And I think that was the closest model to the film. But yeah, it had been through all these various changes. And what Brdečka did in the shift from the previous versions to the film was that he really nuanced the character of Joe a lot more. So yeah, I think that's very true, that I think having this kind of long prehistory, he was able to fine tune it and also to deepen it as well, I think, because I think in the earlier versions, Joe was more of just this straightforward, like Western style good guy. There was no real nuance to him. He was just this very innocent, pure Western hero who liked to drink lemonade. And then by the time you get to the film, there's this other dimension to him. So in a way, that's like a front, isn't it, really? And
it's really cool that he'd been essentially marinating in the genre for decades before we get the film. That's so cool, and probably why it's so rich. I don't know if you can marinate anything in lemonade. You could probably try.
You definitely can use lemon juice to help break it down.
In a marinade, lemon juice is really very good, isn't it?
It is especially for a dense meat like this, which it's because the acid will tend to cook it. If the lamb was cut really thin, then it wouldn't be a great idea.
Well, I want to say about the title, like the fact that, and the themes of the film, the fact it's called Lemonade Joe. It's like lemonade, it's very sweet, but lemons themselves, famously bitter. What do you associate with lemons? Bitterness. And it's just, there's something about that and like the myth making of the West. It's this lovely, happy, sugary, sweet thing, but actually there's this kind of like bitter history like under the surface. So just don't look out in that dark corner. Don't open up that box. Possibly that's me overreading, but
Brdečka, from what I've read about his feelings on the film, I think he did intend there to be that kind of undercurrent of satire or of critique. And it was interesting because sometimes people have suggested that the kind of anti-capitalist critique in the film was something that was imposed by the context. And it was the fact that he was making this in a communist country that meant he had to add this element to make it more acceptable. And yet I've read there was an article at the time of the film's release I think it was in a Slovak journal, that actually criticised the film for being too harsh. It actually said it's a little bit, he said some of the jokes, nice pun by the way, that it a little bit below the belt. And Brdečka took issue with this, and he said that was his intention really, and that he was actually more interested in the reality of the West than he was in the myth. And so that I think he was conscious that he was doing something that was demythologizing the West in a certain way. And so I think that kind of bitter taste is intentional. And it's really interesting too, isn't it, if you put it in the context of the 60s and of what was happening in the American Western and in the European Western, because there was this similar project. As much as it's parodying or referring back to the Westerns of the 30s and 40s, I think it's also, in a way, it's quite contemporary, isn't it, with somebody like Leone, for example.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by the whole idea of other cultures parroting or mirroring back to the U.S. or to any other cultures, one culture mirroring another culture. I've talked before about spaghetti westerns, how I find them very interesting because they're looking at America through a European lens. And this whole idea of Karl May being this incredible Western writer, but he's 100% German. I don't know if he ever stepped foot on U.S. soil, but to have all of these Eastern Westerns reflecting back to us, like, I find it fascinating to see how many Westerns were made in Eastern Europe and Russia. It's just, really? That's wild, but it's a genre. Why not? You can't limit a genre to a country. So yeah, let's do it up. And so yeah, to see this Western particularly, where it's going through all of those different layers, through all of those different years until it gets to this. And I can't even say it's a final product because there have still been adaptations. There's a play that I found out on YouTube where it's pretty modern, that I think it was just a few years ago this was put on. So it still carries a lot of weight and has legs to it. But yeah, I love how it's changed throughout the years until we get to this one example, 1964, with this Lipský version, where we get to see what was the world like at that time and how is it reflecting back the Old West here and using those tropes to tell this quote unquote new story.
And the setting as well, in terms of the year that it's set, 1885. So it's 20 years after the end of the Civil War, and it's 5 years before the frontier closes. And you even have our two Badman brothers having a nostalgic moment about their escapades from their youth when they were running around with Billy the Kid and people like that. And then right at the beginning, just after the credits, you've got the bitingly sardonic dedication to like the heroes of the West who avenged injustice and stood up for the law with a capital Z in Czech, capital Zakon, no matter what. And it's just, that's not what happens in this film. So I love that. It's, yeah, and I didn't even really clock that the first couple of times.
Well, and I love that when it comes to these tropes that they are just played to 11 nearly every single time. Like, we start the movie after that great credit sequence, after that wonderful song. We start at the Badman bar. Hogofogo with the brother is away. It's just Doug Badman who's running this bar. And we have a bar fight right. We don't even get to see it instigated, I don't think. And boom, we are fighting like crazy. And you get these amazing. So, of course, Lipský loves manipulating film, loves manipulating the camera. So one guy will punch somebody else and it looks like it was played backwards. So the other person like leaps up onto the landing above. Or you do have this amazing stunt where this guy is on top of the landing and jumps down like 8 stairs to punch somebody else. I'm like, wow, that looked dangerous. And it's just mass hysteria, and the piano player is just tinkling away on the ivories, and we get to meet some of these characters like Doug, who's reading a newspaper about Hogofogo.
So nonchalantly. He's just like...
And then his aide de camp, and I'm trying to remember his name, is it Grimpo, who's played by Josef Hilnomaz, there we are, who I've seen in a ton of stuff. It's odd. With this movie, there are certain actors that I've seen a ton, and then there are a bunch that I'm not familiar with them very much at all, or they might have played smaller roles, but I was a little bit offended because Vladimir Menzik only plays a bartender in here. He's not one of the main characters.
Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of lines, does he? Yeah, wish we could have heard more of him, yeah.
Of course, he's fucking fantastic every time he's on screen, but it's like him mixing up those drinks for Grimpo and everything. That's probably one of my favorite scenes with him in it.
Interestingly, serving the beer instead of drinking it, because usually he's drinking beer, isn't he? And yeah, it's slightly uncharacteristic and quite neatly turned out as well, really. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the cast, I think the most interesting thing is that, Karel Fiala, who plays Joe, didn't really have any other lead roles, I think, as far as I know, or he didn't really ever do another film of the same stature. I think the only other kind of really well-known thing he did is in Amadeus, where he plays Don Giovanni on stage in a small role, but he could have really believed there was maybe some political factors behind that, but yeah, he didn't really go on to other big starring roles, really, which is a shame because he's so wonderful. He just looks so American somehow. I don't know how to put it otherwise, but yeah, he just looks the part so much. And a shame that his singing was not actually him, though. That was actually Karel Gott, I believe, doing the songs that Joe has, because I believe that Karel Fiala was the wrong type of singer. I don't think he could hit the high notes in the way that Karel Gott could do. Yeah, a bit of an ironic thing being that he was like an operetta star, that he didn't actually do the singing, but it works, I think. It works with Karel Gott. And I just love that opening song as well, because I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, is that English or is it just like pidgin? And I believe Brdečka himself actually wrote the lyrics, which is interesting because I think Brdečka did actually speak English. And it's a brilliant opening statement in a way, isn't it? Because it I think summarizes what the movie is about, because it sounds like English, but it's not. It's just this kind of nonsense. I think the title is So Far to You I May, which is just like nonsense. And then there's little bits of Spanish, but it sounds right. It just sounds good. But yeah.
That little hint of yodeling is lovely.
Oh, yeah. It sounds so great. And yeah, hitting us with the song right away. And then to calm down all the people at the bar, we introduce Tornado Lou, who comes in, and just, I love how the tinting, we were in one tint and then we moved to red, and really sets the stage, as well as that little guy who's got the bellows and he's like blowing smoke as she's coming down the stairs. I love that so much. And I'm just like, okay, here's Destry, here's the bad girl kind of thing. So we're going to have some sort of love triangle going on here. And yeah, it hits all of those notes, but it just does it in such a great way. And we should probably say a little bit about Brdečka as well. We covered Mysterious Castle in the Carpathians. I believe that was just last year. He also wrote Adele Hasn't Had Her Supper Yet, which also Lipský directed. So this is the first part of, you could consider it a trilogy of films that Lipský and he made together. But I think he also did Incorrectly Drawn Hen, which is a short that I think is on a double disc with Lipský films. And then we also talked about When the Cat Comes a few years ago, which was also based on a Brdečka story. That was the Yancey film, which I've been seeing a lot of people posting about lately. And I'm just so glad to see that because it's such a great movie.
And that also has a lot of amazing experiments with colour as well, doesn't it? So that's, I think, was made the year before this one. So I guess this was a really interesting time for this development of a kind of quasi-musical form, wasn't it, really, in Czechoslovakia? And I think actually the same year as Lemonade Joe, you also had The Hot Pickers, which is this great Czech musical, which is often compared with West Side Story. And I think Vlastimil Hala, who co-wrote the music for Lemonade Joe, also co-wrote the music for that as well. So yeah, this was this really interesting time where filmmakers were really experimenting with the musical, with other kind of genres, and these incredible color experiments.
Oh, I'm sorry, real quick, just to correct myself. Incorrectly Drawn Hen was not directed by Lipský. That was actually Brdečka himself that directed that, and he worked with Miloš Masaryk for the screenplay. So another favorite around here on the projection booth.
And then, of course, on the tinting side of things, like that's part of the nostalgia. It's like layers of the nostalgia. So it's nostalgia for early cinema because that's what you did. And so in that way, it's a very original film in the quite like both the like common parlance definition and the pedantic, like going back to the origin. And it's kind of like Martin Scorsese always likes to say about study the old masters because you'll get inspiration there. So I love the fact that it's drawing on like older cinema, and because Westerns themselves are so much part of early cinema because it was such a popular genre for getting people into cinemas. So it's, just multi-layered nostalgia there. I love that.
There's a few other techniques, aren't there, I think, which suggest early cinema. There's like irising effects and there's, the over-cranking.
And then some of the rapid montage feels like quite like 1920s Soviet, which you'd expect coming out of the Eastern Bloc, is that they've studied their Eisensteins and their Vertovs and Kuleshovs and all those guys and like able to take the best from them.
There's the gunfight that Joe has with Hogofogo at one point where it's just basically cut and they're in this position, cut they're in that position, cut they're in this position. And I just love how they're moving around through the space doing this gunfight just through edits rather than through even them moving around. Or even when there's a song later on where there's a dance going on the left side of the screen and Joe's playing piano on the right side of the screen and Hogofogo's or whoever's in this, sorry folks, there's blackface in this movie, but whoever's in this blackface is just moving around and doing all these impossible.
Oh yeah, it's Hogofogo. One of his many disguises.
Yes. I meant as far as, I don't know if that was Kopecký himself, but it probably was. Kopecky's just fucking fantastic in this movie.
So wildly charismatic and just having such a great time, like chewing up the scenery. This must be like a dream role for the kind of actor who enjoys like really hamming it up because he's so good.
He has the same role, doesn't he, in each of the Brdečka and Lipský films. He's always this villain who's also like a master of disguise. But I think this is, to me, the greatest one, just because of just the variety and just the sort of gusto and relish that he takes in just fooling people. And there seem to be just multiple times where he comes in a new disguise, and it's often he's trying to fool even the people that he's actually meant to be on the same side as, and it's just for the pleasure of messing with them, isn't it, really?
He's like a trickster god almost. And this is partly the dub, but he just reminds me of the classic kind of clipped British supervillain that obviously this is anachronistic that Jeremy Irons and Alan Rickman would play in like later decades. But if you go earlier than this, it's Basil Rathbone in Adventures of Robin Hood. It's that wonderfully crisp diction, but with a sort of a snarl and a sneer, like, on every line delivery.
Yeah, he's Moriarty completely.
Brother, you say? I can match that cocoa spot. Size of a Mexican dollar. Is it possible that you are my own blood brother? Horace! Doug! It's been a long time since we shared the sad fate of orphans. Found on the prairie by a real tough bunch of darn rough cowboys. Here, then we knocked around the gay towns of the frontier, and oh, what marvelous times we had together. Ambushing stagecoaches, yes. Robbing banks, yes. Killing sheriffs, holding up trains with Jesse James and Billy the Kid.
It's pretty much literally moustache twirling, isn't it? Because I think he may even do that actually at one point. I think he does it in A Day That Hasn't Had Supper Yet. There's definitely there's a lot of play with like moustaches and beards, aren't there? I think it's in Mysterious Castle in the Carpathians where he has this amazing sort of curled beard, and he seems to judge people by the quality of their beards. And
he's like Rudolph Horinsky. He's just, if only you had some better facial hair. Going back to the tinting, I'm so curious. I found this version that I sent you guys where if this film was recolorized, so somebody took away the tinting and tried to make it a color film. Holy shit, it is so strange because so much of the film is washed out, so then you add color to this washed outness and you're like, what is going on? These poor people on the sides of the frame just barely can see them. They look like ghosts. It's what are you doing? Why would you do that to this film? That's so much a part of the film is its tinting.
In the English dub is they've added an extra little joke into the credits to play on the fact that in the 50s in particular, when you're competing with television, it's like anything to get people in the seat. So you'll be like, it's in this kind of vision, it's in VistaVision, and it's in whatever. And this has just after Lipsky's name, it has like in lemon tone by Allied artists, and it's just like extra little joke we've just crammed in.
And it makes sense too, because I have the impression that I think yellow is the dominant tint, isn't it? So I guess that was, makes sense to me too, because this may just be a sort of a personal idiosyncrasy, but I think of westerns as yellow somehow. It is the right tint somehow, but I just love the way that they're constantly shifting. So I think whenever there's like a romantic scene or a romantic moment, it goes red, doesn't it? And then when you get...
Or more like erotic, because when you've got the dancers, it's love/sex, is red.
And then is it the Kolalok Saloon where it's this very saintly bluish white tint? And to me, that just typifies the approach really, because in a way it's one of those films that it just throws everything at you, but it's done in this it's like a very precise and controlled way. I think at each point they knew what they were doing. It's not random.
You even have a sort of a dark green kind of like gothy vibe in a couple of the Hogofogo scenes, and also when Tornado Lou turns to the dark side, you have a goth sequence where she comes down the stairs with this candelabra, and it's just spooky. And like Eastern Central European, they do like gothic horror so well over there.
I love you mentioning the green, especially over that montage of Hogofogo and all of his dastardly deeds that he's done, and just also the use of like old-timey looking drawings. The whole credit sequence is done over these, like it has that same like wanted poster type font, and they use those old looking drawings so, especially when there's a song. So at one point Hogofogo is dressed up like a blind man, and of course Lemonade Joe is helping him out because he's one of the best heroes in the entire world. So he's playing piano, and the old man starts to tell this story, and they move up to this picture, this drawing of New Orleans, and then you see figures start to enter into the drawing, into the artwork. And then it suddenly becomes this whole sequence of this kind of New Orleans funeral that's going on. And that I think that might be tinted. I'm not sure which cut and tint that is, but there's also that montage of, like I was saying, his dastardly acts, which are all in green. And then you get all of the disguises that he's wearing, and he's got one eye closed. And oh my God, it's so good. I love seeing what they're doing with Kopecký's face and just all of the horrible things that he's done over the years, and just so happy about them. He just loves being evil.
I love the fact that the word you had in the notes for Hogofogo was fiend. That's exactly the word. It's like the Joker in one of his more like malicious, I am stacking up the body count and having delightful amounts of fun every second of it. Huh?
Of course, our good side is being represented by Winifred and her father, and they're both temperance people, which plays right into Joe's thing, because he's just, alcohol is so bad. Everybody should be drinking Cola Loca. And he is basically, they find out later on in the film that he is a salesman for Cola Loca, that he's the heir to the Cola Loca fortune. He's basically the son of Coca-Cola.
He's an oligarch is what he is.
It kind of reminds me of the Coca-Cola Kid, the Eric Roberts film, the Dusan Makavejev, I think, directed that one.
I guess Nestle are probably big in the States as well, but in the UK, the Milky Bar Kid for Nestle's white chocolate.
I remember that.
I don't know whether that's a campaign that continues, but that's something I definitely remember from my childhood.
Now the man they call the sheriff was a low-down, dirty rat, mean as a rattlesnake. Why, he once stole a hat. If he passed by your way, better watch out there, you see. So the town called for help, and along came me. It's the Milky Bar Kid. The Milky Bar Kid is strong and tough, and only the best is good enough. The creamiest milk, the whitest bar, the good taste that's in Milky Bar. The Milky Bars are on me. Milky Bars so creamy white. This ain't Milky Bar.
But he is a trust fund baby. I think you said that, Jonathan. I totally agree that we find out, he's not as pure as maybe he seems.
When it's finally revealed, and I think his pocketbook drops out of his pocket, Winifred finds it, and I think at first he thinks she's going to be upset, but then she's actually delighted, because that means she is going to get a piece of that. And that kind of mercenary, kind of money-minded attitude, she has that as well. So they're perfect for each other, because they're like negotiating the percentage, aren't they, between each other? And
she is all lined up to become Mrs. Lemonade when it comes to this, or Mrs. Cola Loca. We've skirted around this a little bit as far as like where we're at in the world in 1964 and what this has become after the book, the short stories, the some of the short films that have taken from this and everything, until we get to this film, which is really an attack on capitalism, I would say, which I'm all for.
I think it's really sharp in the way it sort of pinpoints. It's that connection between like big business and then law and religion as well, isn't it? That somehow they all ultimately serve profit, and they serve the making of money, and you can bend it however you like ultimately. As long as you are serving profit, you can accept anything. And it's funny, isn't it, when they set up the Cola Loca saloon and the fighting is still continuing, isn't it? They're still beating each other up, but now they're drinking the lemonade, so it's good, isn't it, now?
It's just such a brutal juxtaposition, and Winifred's just singing about how lovely life is in Arizona and how polite everyone is, and then they're just people just lamping each other and throwing them through windows, and
and it's in slow motion now. It's this beautiful sort of classy, rather than overcranked, it's like it's now slow motion, so it looks more elegant, but still people are shooting each other.
Balletic. And then in terms of going back a little bit, and like the satires, like the first gunfight we have is just, it's just like wall to wall, like gunshots, explosions, like people jumping acrobatically, but they cannot hit a barn door. And then when everyone switches off the sauce to the lemonade, you have this sequence where these two guys just like gun each other down like in cold blood, and Lemonade Joe is like, well, this is great, isn't it? Like, everyone's so much more accurate now, and it's just like, it's quite a body count. His thirst for lemonade is pretty much matched by his thirst for blood. There's a sequence where he just like, these like robbers are escaping and he just blasts them all away. Like, he doesn't aim to shoot the horse so that he can be arrested and taken alive. No, he is just, he's John Wick. He's headshots. No one gets out of this alive. To be fair to him, like, he shoots plenty of people like non-lethally, like he shoots people's guns out of their hand, but that's not him being humane. It's about him like showing his prowess, like shooting the belt off Grimpo.
And then when Grimpo's at the top of the stairs coming down with the shotgun, he just idly throws his gun over the side and shoots Grimpo again.
It's part of the whole satire of the film is that Lemonade Joe's gunfighting and physical fighting later skills are just preternatural. Like, he's basically got extrasensory perception and could just like pinpoint accurate shoot somebody over the shoulder from the other side of the room or the other side of the street. And it's probably too early to be satirizing like Clint Eastwood characters in spaghetti westerns, because he's just so ridiculously unrealistically a good shot and just able to like kill ridiculous amounts of people without being hit himself, and that's Joe.
Yeah, it's the same year that Fistful of Dollars comes out.
Yeah, I always find that amazing, really, because I think especially that scene with the 4 bandits on horseback where he just shoots 3 of them and then he shoots the last one just while he's talking to Winifred. That almost reads like a parody of the famous sort of first big shootout in Fistful of Dollars, doesn't it, where he shoots the 4 people one after the other. That's, to me, one of the strange things I think about a lot of these Czech parodies, that they were not only parodying something that didn't really exist properly in Czechoslovakia, but it's almost like they were parodying something that didn't yet exist yet in like international cinema in general, really, because it's similar to Who Wants to Kill Jesse, which was obviously spoofing like comic books, and it's like this example of a comic book movie, but it comes really before European cinema had started to do that. So it comes before Barbarella and things like that, and it's just this weird kind of contradiction where you're actually parodying something. So it does feel like a parody of a spaghetti western, even though this was very early, wasn't it? I mean, there were possibly I think they'd made some German westerns by this point. I think you'd had that kind of early Karl May adaptations. But yeah, as you say, Fistful of Dollars was the same year. And yeah, it's almost like riffing on something that was not yet there.
And this has reminded me of another, like, very brief moment. Grimpo, like, he's cleaning his gun and he looks through, like, he cracks the pistol open and looks through one of the chambers for just a second. But it's just a second, and it's like the James Bond gun barrel. And this is 2 years after Dr. No. And they were really cranking out the Bond films at that point. So I think maybe you'd had From Russia with Love and Goldfinger at this point as well. But the fact is, that feels like it's deliberate, but it's also so soon that could it be? I know, like, filmmakers had more ability to travel outside of beyond the Iron Curtain than the average like member of the public, and they could also ask for things and just say, we need to see this to be able to keep up with the West. And I think also, like, Czechoslovakia was more liberal than further east anyway in the 60s, and of course this is the time of the Khrushchev thaw when the Soviets are less iron-heeled, although, yeah, say that to the Hungarians in 56.
I want to go back to that gunfight real quick, as far as the absurdity of it and just the wildness of it, and to see these guys who are obviously landing on trampolines and then jumping over these horses and things, or the one guy who jumps into a barrel and then he comes up and 5 other guys all come up at the same time. And we are doing a lot of, suddenly the camera goes into a Dutch angle. We're following a guy who like lands on the floor and starts shooting. and the cutting speed is so fast. And I'm like, is this something that Sam Raimi might have seen? Because this feels so Raimi-esque in certain parts of this, with that quick cutting, the camera moving all over the place. Very, to me, what John Woo was doing in things like The Killer and stuff, though obviously not nearly as comedically, but this feels like it's got that energy that really drives somebody like a Raimi. And this movie will just suddenly be like, okay, yeah, now here's the craziest gunfight that you've seen. Here's the barroom fight that you've seen. Here's that. I'm surprised that there isn't a stagecoach. There is, but not like a stagecoach robbery kind of thing in this one. It's so many of these things that we've seen in other movies, but Lipsky's just, okay, you thought you've seen that before. Here, let me give you something that you've not seen, or something you've seen, but in a completely new way.
And go back to the silent cinema, like both in settings and the sheer physicality, it's like very Keaton-esque. Just the fact that people are just acrobatic and like, how are you not hurting yourself here? It's like, probably frequently you are.
I did find when I was watching it that I would sometimes just go back and look at certain moments and I would try and work out, is that reversed or is that how it should be? It's sometimes difficult to tell whether something is more impossible as you're seeing it or like in the reverse order. I think there's like a moment where somebody jumps onto a horse and I was trying to think, has that been reversed, or is that actually physically possible to do it that way, or would it be more difficult if you're jumping off the horse? But there's a lot of things in that they just seem physically very difficult to do. Really, I read that they used like some of the stunt performers. I think they were like judo masters, or they used like basketball players, and they just got all these like sports players, I think. And I don't know how developed the stunt industry was in Czechoslovakia at the time, but you had a lot of people that were just very good at like jumping through things. And I think another point of reference too is like animation, isn't it? Because and something that I love is the fact that do you see that tool company? It's called the Acme Tool Company, and there's that wonderful kind of Looney Tunes reference there, isn't there? I think.
And just to have the on-screen animation at one point when Joe and Hogofogo are going at it, shooting at each other, and you see the bullets being animated across the screen like dotted lines, and they just keep hitting each other.
It's like they're so evenly matched.
Yes, they're just so perfect, and they just keep shooting each other's bullets right out of the air. That's basically like one of the jokes in the Suicide Squad with, oh yeah, my bullets are smaller, they make smaller holes or whatever. And it's just, yep, they're shooting each other, just hitting one another's bullets right out of the air. And it's that creativity that I just love in these films. I think, Jonathan, was the first time we ever talked, was that about Happy End? If not, that was 2017, I think we talked about that movie. So talk about just going absolutely nuts, just playing the entire movie backwards. Eat your heart out, Christopher Nolan.
And it's so like offhand as well, isn't it, really? It's not done with any real pretension. And Happy End, I think, is an interesting one because it's so experimental, isn't it? It pushes this idea really to its breaking point. And it works. It realizes it perfectly. And I guess this is also the time of the new wave, of course. And I think Lipsky said in relation to Happy End, he said, this is an experiment, but it's not a new wave experiment. And it's interesting that he would make that distinction because to me, a lot of the techniques are very similar to what the new wave was doing. I guess it does it in the guise of a comedy, in the guise of a genre film, a genre spoof, but it is as experimental in its own way as any of the new wave films.
And then in terms of personnel, there's a lot of shared in front and behind the camera filmmakers from Karel Zeman films. So just that drawing on that like level of visual invention. I haven't seen Baron Munchausen / Baron Pratzil yet, but I saw Invention for Destruction for the first time earlier this year. You're just gobsmacked, and then there's something about the humor in this film that's very like proto-Python and visuals like very like proto-Terry Gilliam. And that reminds me of other like Czech films because there's so much about the cremator that's very Gilliam-esque. And I know, obviously, because he talks about it a lot, Karel Zeman, but it's just like, how widely seen was this? Obviously, we've talked a bit about the English language dub, but it just seems like it was ahead of the curve, but also drawing on earlier local filmmakers as well to just create something so, as we've said, creative and original.
Yeah, I did get that release in America, I think, in the 60s. I think it was quite widely seen around Europe as well. I think the Eastern Bloc countries, I think some West European countries, I think Latin America, it was shown in, I think some Latin American countries, and it was shown widely at film festivals. There's a wonderful story that Lipský tells about Henry Fonda watching it at Karlovy Vary in the company of, I think it's Cliff Robertson and Jack Valenti, and he said that Henry Fonda apparently loved it, and he just guffawed all the way through it, and apparently loved it so much that he even told Peter Fonda. And then I think in the 80s, I think it was screened again at Karlovy Vary on the request of Peter Fonda. So I think it did create some impact. I think it was shown initially at the San Sebastian Film Festival, and he says that Nicholas Ray was there, and Nicholas Ray was laughing through it as well. And I think it did create some international impact. Going back to Gilliam, I think that's true about the connection with Gilliam, I think, and the Python-esque humour. I think the connection with Zeman, I feel that there is a very Zeman-esque quality to that sequence with the funeral procession that Hogofogo is narrating, because you have that layering of real actors against a kind of a painted backdrop. And to me, that's very Zeman-esque. And it reminds me actually that I think Brdečka wrote some of the script for Invention for Destruction. So as you say, I think there is a lot of interconnection between people on this film and people on a lot of the animated films and the new wave films. And speaking of the cremator, of course, Uri Hertz does have a little role in this as the gambler. I love the fact that he does. I don't think he even says anything, but he's just there with a monocle and a top hat, and
he loses his wig, if that's the same guy.
Yeah.
Is that the dude?
Oh, it might be a dude. I think they're at the same table, aren't they? I think, when they're. I can't remember if. Yeah.
And then, of course, Vladimir Menshik is in the cremator as the recurring, abusive husband who just keeps turning up at these different events and being horrible.
I want to know where the image of an undertaker with the top hat and those little black glasses, because we get one of those, the undertaker is very happy about all the chaos that's happening in town.
He's counting it on his fingers, isn't he?
It kind of reminds me of, again, going back to Fistful of Dollars, where Clint Eastwood's...
Get 3 coffins ready. My mistake, 4 coffins.
And there's a point, it's either in Fistful of Dollars or in Yojimbo, where the Undertaker's, listen, this is going to come to a point where I can't even keep up with this stuff anymore. I've just seen that image, when you see these little black glasses with the chain going, that is the image of an Undertaker. And I'm like, was that one guy? Was that a drawing? How do we all associate Undertakers with this outfit? Because you were talking about Monty Python, and I was thinking of the whole...
Now, there's 3 things we can do with your mum. We can bury her, burn her, or dump her.
Dump her?
Dump her in the Thames.
What?
Oh, did you like her?
Yes.
Oh, well, we won't dump her then.
And I'm pretty sure that the guys that take the coffin out are dressed very similar to this.
It does mess with your head a bit, doesn't it? I find the same, really, that there are lots of things where I think, that's obviously a trope that existed long before this. And yet, when I try and think of a more perfect example, I can't, because, it just typifies those kind of iconic figures, doesn't it, really?
And Grimpo just eating everything. It's both Python-esque, and then I love how Hogofogo goes, he's a vegetarian. His energy, Grimpo's, reminds me a little bit of Harpo Marx, of just, he will just destroy things because that's what he does.
For me, he reminds me of Mongo from Blazing Saddles, and I think this would be a great double feature with Blazing Saddles, because they both just skewer Westerns so much in different ways, but this could just as easily be Rock Ridge with the way that everybody is fighting all the time and just the chaos of it. This really seems to presage the whole idea of a comic Western. We've had comic Westerns before, of course, Cat Ballou and all those things, but this has that same chaos, that same manic energy that A Blazing Saddles does for me. And as you're saying the whole thing about the Acme Hardware Company, I'm just realizing right now, and I don't know why it took so long, that every single sign in this movie is all in English. It just did not dawn on me before.
It does either assume like a bit high level of English literacy amongst the audience, or it just goes, oh, that's fine. Like those jokes, some folks will get and some folks won't, but it just, lends to the authenticity. And some of them are so sly, especially in like the temperance / like the Goodmans, or are they Goodman or Goodmen? I don't know. Father and daughter saloon. They have things like better buy than borrow. It's just, very capitalist. And then other sort of more temperance-y things like Bacchus has drowned more souls than Neptune. It's quite like a highfalutin reference.
I think there's one that I can't actually remember seeing it in the film, but I've read about it, where I think Tornado Lou has a sign, I think, on the ceiling that says something like, I can't remember the exact line, but it's something like, there is no success without hard work, or something like that. And I've read Lipsky write about it. I've read a little piece where he says about, because I think that was the thing that Henry Fonda laughed at, I think. So he says this was like the funniest moment, but I'm trying to just jog my memory of where it actually appears. But there are a lot of those little throwaway English jokes, aren't there, like that?
Yeah, although that seems very close to Arbeit macht frei.
Yes, that's true.
The like German big business associations with the Holocaust, and this being like less than 20 years after the end of the war.
I love when the saloon comes back after Hogofogo comes to town, and he does his best to say, drinking lemonade is not manly.
Alcoholic beverages are made for men, and you all look like men to me.
That's a real man's drink, and he brings all the business back. Business booming so well that a woman will be walking down the steps with a man, a prostitute, I should say, will be walking down the steps with a man, and the next guy is right in line and will just pick her up and take her right back upstairs. That's how well they're doing as far as business goes.
Just and going back to some of the editing thing, the fact that like after Hogofogo goes into the bar and says, I say phooey to Cola Loca, and then you just have him just making a point of it. But then you have just the patrons just disappearing until we're left with Ezra Goodman and Winifred Goodman just standing by themselves, because everyone's just given in to the appeals to their masculine insecurities. It's like, you want a real man's drink, don't you? And I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll go over there.
I love when he comes in, Hogofogo, the first time you see him, and he comes into the saloon, and it hasn't had enough business that everyone is there covered in cobwebs, including Grimpo.
And Doug there's a customer, and he's just angry that Grimpo isn't just like stepping to immediately.
Yeah, drops a bottle on his head as Doug's just lounging on top of the piano. And then the way that Hogofogo comes over and like reaches inside of Tornado Lou's bodice and just pulls out a whole bunch of flowers. He goes over to Grimpo and rubs his cane across his head. Grimpo starts to eat it. He pulls a cigarette from behind Grimpo's ear and then starts to light the cigarette very Klaus Kinski and for a few dollars more, but he lights it off of his face. And then he leaves Grimpo there with 2 rabbits in either hand. It's like,
and the flowers that he takes from Tornado Lou's bosom, she throws them away and then they explode because, of course, they're magic flowers.
The edit of when he goes into the Lemonade Joe bar, the temperance bar, and he pulls off his incredible beard like he has, and I guess it's the sheriff
It is the sheriff, yeah. I checked and paused it, so oh yeah, there's a sheriff badge.
We don't really see the law in this at all, and he's quickly dispatched too. He has the wanted poster for Hogofogo, and we have this whole little montage of...
It takes quite a long time, doesn't it?
His face, the poster, his eyes.
As someone who suffers from a degree of face blindness, I was like, this is funny, but also I feel your pain, man. And then his dispatch of the sheriff is just brutal. Guns him down with the fake arms. It's just so quick. It's like Obi-Wan in Star Wars, but just evil.
It's so nice that we just have this big saloon set and we're just going to redress it and retint it for what we've got with the Temperance Bar versus the evil saloon. And it's just the same darn bar. And we even still have the same two barmen working.
They seem to go back and forth, don't they? Yeah.
They're very good barmen. The one guy who's not Vladimir Menchik, the way that he is just like whipping those bottles down the counter and everyone's picking them up and stuff.
So slick. And then I love going back right to the beginning where you've got the Kill Devil cocktail that they keep... I don't know whether it's pepper they're dumping into that. Something to make it like even stronger. And then you've got like the skull cup that Winifred dumps on the floor. And of course it burns through the floor like it's alien blood. And it's so great. And it gives me an excuse to mention that Menchik he's like the lead in Esther Krombakova's murdering. It's translated as murdering the devil, but like me being a pedant, and there's no articles in Czech anyway. It should be murdering a devil because that character is not like Lucifer himself. He's like a very low-ranking diabolical functionary. But that film is so good and shares like the visual flair of this. This seems to be one of the few films from this time period of note that Krombaková was not involved with, because she seems to be like MVP of Czechoslovak cinema of the 60s and 70s. But
it is surprising though, that she didn't work on it, because yes, she did work on she worked on The Man from Outer Space with Lipsky. In fact, I think that was one of her earliest productions that she worked on, really. So it is. Maybe there was some kind of hidden sort of collaboration somewhere, but as far as I know, she didn't. But it would have seemed appropriate, I guess.
Yeah, I'm very surprised, that she wasn't involved in this. I think this whole month, because we're doing some newer films that she might have been retired by that point or dead, that she's not involved in everything this month. But she will be mentioned next week when we talk about Romance for Bugle, because she did all the outfits in that one too.
I believe actually the costume design on this film had some input from Brdečka himself, and that's really interesting, isn't it? That as well as being a screenwriter, he also had some involvement in the look of the film and in the credits. And I think it's the same too in Adela Hasn't Had Supper Yet. You just get this credit, which is something like artistic collaboration or something. It's a very broad category. And I like the fact that, there wasn't this kind of hard division between being a writer and being involved in other aspects of the production. And from what I've seen, when I've seen like stills from the production, it seems Brdečka was there with Lipsky and that he was giving his input onto like the look of the costumes or on the sort of compositions. And it seems that he had a very intensive level of control. I think even maybe some of the illustrations are his possibly too, because they look very much like the illustrations that we see in Adela Hasn't Had Supper Yet, and like some of Brdečka's own sketches. And so I think that a lot of the look of the film is down to him too, really.
I kind of love that. I kind of love that he was so involved in this, and it wasn't one of these, oh, thanks for the idea, we're just going to do this stuff without you. But when I saw that he had screenwriting credit, I was like, oh, that's great. I'm really glad. And to hear I really hadn't thought about those sketches, because whenever I think about Adela Hasn't Had Her Supper Yet, I just immediately go to the whole Funkmeyer thing when it comes to the creature design, and obviously very Little Shop of Horrors when it comes to how Adela looks.
It's a bit confusing, I think, because of the fact that Brdečka produced so many animated films and yet didn't tend to do the visual design. So it can be a bit confusing because he actually was a gifted artist himself. He was a gifted illustrator, but he tended to leave the visual design of the animations to somebody else. Like he would work with I think Kamil Lotak, for example, or even like Eva Schwankmajerova on one of the short films. But I think he still had this sort of visual talent, and I think it's there in maybe the costumes and in the stylization of the figures, really, because they are like cartoon figures, aren't they? Really, it's very precise. Each character is very precisely designed. And looking at the Hogofogo character again, I recently watched Frontier Marshal, the Alan Dwan film from the 40s, which I read was an inspiration on this film. And I think the way Hogofogo looks, it's very similar to the way Doc Holliday looks in that film. And I guess it's also just a generic kind of like baddie costume, isn't it, really? But it's very visually precise, isn't it?
Yeah, I wanted to tip my chapeau to whoever, I guess it would be the costume designers, Jiří Brdečka and Fernand Vacha, for, the hat game is... I know nothing about hats, but it is very strong, and particularly Hogofogo's hat just looks so... I am a very evil guy. It's an excellent hat. And then in a different way, because he's more the businessman, Doug has his like top hat, which just has like ruthless tycoon about it as well. And of course you get the hat joke when mean prank really in the bar early on with Winifred and Ezra, where like they do their temperance pitch and one of the cowboy toughs like pulls the brim down and like wrecks his hat. There's a lot of desecration of clothing in this film as well.
One of the questions I have actually is in the scene where they desecrate and they kind of pour all the kind of ketchup and the sort of icky looking things over Joe's costume. They put the hat on, don't they? And then I think it's like Tabasco sauce or something, isn't it? This is very like viscous, horrible, kind of messy sort of substance that pours over his head. And they seem to pull the brim of the hat off. And then I've never been quite sure what he's meant to look like, but I always feel there's meant to be some reference point that I'm not getting there, because he has this, it's almost like a sort of a Turkish, like a pasha or something, and then the moustache. And I always wonder whether it was I'm trying to remember the name now of the Karl May character. There's a Karl May character that was he's like a traveller, and I've written down somewhere, I think it's like Karma Ben.
Yeah, I know it's that old Shatterhand, which was like his big thing, or Winnetou was his other big one. But yeah, he had a whole Karl May. What a wild career, and what so many movies based on his stuff.
One of the interesting things here is the fact that I think of all the things that it refers to, it doesn't really have any reference to Native Americans. And I believe that was simply just because, according to Brdečka, he just wasn't interested in that theme. But I think that's the only sort of omission, isn't it? Which is surprising when you think of like how the Karl May influence was so strong, like in Central Europe. And then there was that whole genre in East Germany of what they call the Indiana filmer, where they just switched it around, and the Native Americans were the good guys, and then the American colonizers were the bad guys. And this is an interesting absence here, I think.
The one thing I would say on that is I think you do see like a stereotype like carving of an indigenous person, and also in one of the songs, because I had to look this up because I was just like, what is that name? There's a reference to Manitou. I didn't know who or what that was, so I had to look that up. And the reference is that even Manitou will get a taste for trigger whiskey. It wants a taste for firewater, I think is how it's translated in the captions. Yeah, but generally it is that it is absent.
Jonathan, I just posted in the chat. Is it Kara Ben Nemsi
that's the one
that you're thinking of?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, yeah, because that hat and mustache looks like what they turned Joe into.
Yeah, that would be interesting if so, because I don't think they're actually Western themed stories. I think it's about Karl May. Yeah, one of these other sort of adventure stories about these travels through the Middle East, I think. And it's one of those things that's a little bit like, I out of the context. But yeah, it is a strange moment, that, isn't it? And I guess like costume is so important, isn't it, all the way through the movie? The fact that the city's called Stetson City, and that announces right away that it's all about, ties into the theme of masquerade, doesn't it, and performance, really, and the idea that I guess you have like the image, and then the image is concealing something. So Joe, represents this appearance of something that's good and that's moral, but behind that there is this very shrewd, like, profiteering attitude. And
yeah, because of course what causes Lou to turn on him is that he rejects her advances, and she's saved his life a couple of times, and he tries to pay her, and I think he calls her like a poor wretch because she just fancies him, and there's no fiscal gain to be had, and he's just, no, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, non-transactional relationships just do not compute for Joe. And rather than trying to give her this check for $5, like, he doesn't try and pass it give it to her in her hand. He tries to stuff it in her cleavage. And it's like, why don't you just give it to her like a normal person? Like, this isn't like in a strip club, because even though she's like a performer, it's like they're backstage. Can you not just treat her like a normal human, please, Joe? And he's just like, I don't know anything about this. And he's the worst.
Yeah, it's interesting that he's the hero, but he is just so clueless so often. And you're like, okay, like, I kind of revel when bad things happen to him.
In the scene where, he's tortured, essentially, or his costume is tortured, you don't really, that could actually play out quite unpleasantly, but I don't think you really feel that sorry for him, do you really? I think in a way you feel there's a little bit of a comeuppance there, I think. I would root for Tornado Lou, I think, in that scene.
Going back to the costume stuff, that is such a important moment, is when after he gets shot, I think he comes back. It's almost like his resurrection, and he's then wearing a different outfit. He's wearing, I could be wrong as far as the timeline goes, but that they switch from that all white fringe game that he's got going, and then now he's wearing like a black and white type of outfit. So it's, oh, you're embracing the darker side, because obviously when you have a movie where you've got characters named Badman and Goodman, of course the costumes are going to reflect that when it comes to the black hats and the white hats, and Joe embracing more of that moral, neutral stance. It's, oh, this is a big deal. Look at that outfit when he comes back and is going to take care of some business. He's already literally spanked Hogofogo in one scene, which is fantastic.
Throws him around like a rag doll.
That kind of makes sense thematically, doesn't it? Because I think when he's wearing the black outfit, that's when he meets at the gambling table with Hogofogo. And this is something that I got more of from watching it again, that it seems like he's trying to make a deal with him, isn't he? Or he's trying to get, to me, it seems like he's trying to get Hogofogo to endorse the Kolalok.
Exactly that, yeah.
It's this fascinating idea that I guess Hogofogo too is a celebrity, isn't it? Because of course there's the magazine with his name on it, and I guess he represents another kind of fame. So
infamy.
Even if you're so even if you're famous for being really evil, it's still celebrity and it still works as a promotional tool.
There's no such thing as bad publicity.
I don't know if we want to give away the big twist that comes later on in the movie when it comes to chocolate birthmark that Hogofogo and his brother both have, which kind of reminded me a little bit of Lust in the Dust, of all things, with the birthmark, the trope that goes on in there. But real quick before I forget, I did want to talk about how much I love the use of, I can't really say smoke signals, but the use of smoke in order to telegraph messages. Like when Doug is standing behind the guy at the poker table and he blows out smoke rings that look like 4 8s, or when he's on the porch of the saloon and he blows some smoke rings and it says Joe, and the smoke goes inside of the saloon to alert Hogofogo and Grimpo.
I did wonder whether that's a reference to the fact that this is the West. You do have Native American / indigenous folks, and like smoke signals are a thing, and maybe that was a reference to that. I don't know. But yeah, another example of things being communicated visually with words on screen. And a favorite joke of mine is the poster of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And it's in English again, but George Washington says, "If I was still alive, I would drink only Kolalok lemonade." And Abraham Lincoln says, "Me too." And that's super dark because it's 1885, so he's only been assassinated 20 years ago, and had he not been assassinated, he'd be 76, which is a good innings in the 19th century, but he could still feasibly be alive. So I joke about him not being alive, but if he were, he's endorsing this product. Is just, again, it's like knitting the commerce and capitalism and patriotism together. It's like the message that it's satirizing is you can't be a good patriot unless you're buying stuff and you're buying the sort of like the state endorsed product. And then in terms of like going back to the name things, I thought maybe this is a massive overread, but the fact that it's Lemonade Joe, maybe it just sounds good, or maybe it's a reference to Joe McCarthy and McCarthyism and just like that paranoia about communism and just being, and if you're paranoid about communism, you have to be hyper-capitalist. And then at the other end of things, the fact he's Joe, maybe this is also Uncle Joe, and this is a ostensibly benevolent figure who is like out for the good and trying to help everyone, and a benevolent dictator, except like what he really wants to do is just shoot people. So maybe a massive overread, but something about the actuality not living up to the propaganda.
Yeah, I'd not thought of that, but I think, very plausible, because I think, there was a tendency to use other things to critique communism, and that could be there, I think.
And I also wondered whether the escalation of the war between the two saloons is maybe like a super sly commentary on the superpower rivalry of how everyone's just stuck in the middle while these two like ideological opposites are just duking it out, and there's like this escalation going on. One of the things I liked in that as the competition escalates is that, in terms of linking back to religion and temperance, is that Winifred, like her kind of religious scruples and presentation, like that is flexible, but like making the money is like the non-negotiable, because she goes from like when we first see her like very prim, like you only see her face and hand, she's all covered up and just very, it's too early for Edwardian, but like late Victorian costume. But then when business is bad and they're trying to bring it back, you see her like dancing on the bar, and she's got like her stockings, and she's making the most of the fact that she's got very like long, conventionally attractive legs, and it's fine, it's selling some lemonade. So it's like a progression of that character, or that side of things.
I think that's really true, because that connects to what Tornado Lou says towards the end when she says, I'm going to open up I think the subtitles translate it as like a parlor, but I think really it's referring to a brothel. She's like, I'm going to open up a brothel that sells only Kolalok lemonade. And then Ezra Goodman says, I can't remember exactly what he says, but it's, yes, I approve of that. This is a noble intention. I agree with this, and it's all okay because it's selling lemonade.
We were talking about that whole master of disguise thing with Hogofogo. One of my favorite bits is after he kidnaps Winifred and he's carrying her down the street, and Joe sees him and comes up and taps him on the shoulder, like, what are you doing? And then he turns around and suddenly has a whole beard and glasses and all these things, because we just saw him, but that cut, he changes outfits and is, I'm the family doctor.
I'm never quite sure whether that's meant, because he's doing that accent, which Czechs tended to do as like an imitation of Germans, because he does the same in Adela Hasn't Had Supper Yet, but I can never work out whether that's actually a little bit of an anti-Semitic caricature, because
sure looks like,
I think it's meant to be like a German-speaking Jewish person, and which is strange because I believe Kopecký himself was half Jewish, so that would make it even more uncomfortable, I think. And Yeah, it's another kind of just slightly like off element in it, along with the blackface, of course.
About the blackface, obviously 3 white guys talking about this, which is never ideal, but I can't tell. I can't tell whether it's like indulging in it or whether it's satirizing it, or both. I think it's probably both. Because it's so much, I guess, like carefully observed to how like it exists in like British and American like blackface. It's really like doing the trope hard. But yeah, so to the extent that it's just, and even like some of the like the dance, like the shapes that he does, it's clearly like the result of some very like careful study, but it's also just so gross.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is ambiguous, isn't it? Because as you said, I mean, I think there is a little bit of a satirical element there, because there's that reference to segregation, isn't there? I think Doug Badman says when he sees it, he says, no, yeah, this is like whites only. So there is that satirical. But as you say, yeah, I think otherwise it's pretty unpleasant.
And I don't know whether this was in the dubbed version, but when Lemonade Joe is trying to get his endorsement, he says, here's a contract to read, if you can even read.
At that point, he does know that he's Hogofogo, though, right? It feels like he's there with Doug and Hogofogo and maybe even Lou and Grimpo, but I'm not sure. But yeah, no, you were talking earlier about what the influence of this film, and I figure if there's an English dub of this, it had to be, you said already, it was shown here in the States. I was wondering too if this was such a, Jonathan, I know you've written extensively around Tomorrow I'll Wake Up and Scald Myself with Tea, and the showing of that on, what was it, BBC Two or whatever, and just like how much of an impact that had. I was very curious if this thing ever showed on like television, either in Europe or in the States, because it just feels like it was such an odd choice, in a good way, that Facets put this out. Like, this movie feels like, with Facets putting this out in the, what was that, early 2000s? That seems late for VHS, but I was just reading an article and it was 2002 and it said Facets putting this out on VHS. So it just feels like it was amongst the pantheon of the stuff that they were putting out to be put out with Closely Watched Trains. And I didn't realize that this was actually an entry for the Oscars. They didn't put it into the Oscars, but it was like the Czech submission for the Oscar category. Looking through that list that I found on Wikipedia, I was just like, this is wild to see just how many times Lipsky's films were submitted for that stuff. And just because, again, at least here in 2025, it feels like even amongst a lot of Czech film fans, when I talk about Oldřich Lipský, it's, oh, whatever, like poo-pooed and stuff. But it's, so just to read the films used in nomination. So Lemonade Joe, 64, Shop on Main Street. Now everyone hopefully knows that's a freaking classic. Loves of Avalon, Closely Watched Trains, Fireman's Ball, The Cremator, Days of Betrayal, Lovers in Year One, Circus in the Circus, another Lipsky film, One Silver Piece, Nick Carter in Prague, or Adele hasn't had her supper yet, for 78, another Lipsky. Those Wonderful Men with a Crank in 79, Love Between the Raindrops. I'm going to quit reading this list because I'm just going to go on forever, up to 91. But yeah, to have 3 Lipskys in that group is pretty remarkable to me. But I know he has a little museum in Prague, and that's one of the reasons I want to go to Prague. And I don't know if my wife realizes how much I love his films, but yeah, I want to see this. I want to see, like, they have like little vignettes of his films and stuff. I'm like, yeah, I love this guy's work.
Even if I guess they weren't always like critically well, although I think they did tend to be critically well received too. But yeah, they certainly were really popular. And I believe Lemonade Joe itself, I think I've read it was actually the biggest grossing film. It was the most popular film, I think, in Czechoslovakia made in the 60s, I think. And obviously that in itself is an amazing decade with lots of other very popular and great films. So yeah, it was in good company.
It's a competitive field.
Yeah, it was hugely successful, and yeah, it had this so I guess just in terms of the popularity and just I think of how enduring it's been, I think it's something that people still, I think in the Czech Republic and Slovakia too, I think still tend to know, and I think still tend to quote from. I think sadly, the "I'll be back" line has now been stolen by the Terminator, but I think that was, that's one of those lines that people do tend to know, I think, in Czech culture. Yeah, I guess in terms of the popularity that it's had. There's a really interesting essay by Petr Štěpánek about this film, and where he puts it in the context of Czech comedy and the Czech film industry at the time. And he says that basically this was a country that I think in the mid-60s, it was a country where people had still not really seen many Westerns. I think since the 40s, they'd only shown just like a handful of films. I think they'd seen like High Noon, maybe like The Magnificent Seven, but most people had very limited exposure to Westerns. And he makes the point that although this is nominally a parody, people were actually enjoying it because they just got a chance to see a Western. So they were just really indulging in just the sort of the settings and in the kind of the stereotypes. And yeah, they were actually enjoying it as a real Western. And I think that's a really interesting point about a lot of these Czech parodies, because they were, in a way, they were parodying something that didn't really exist properly in Czechoslovakia as a sort of a regular genre. So it's almost like they were offering the real thing in the guise of a parody.
Yeah, it's so interesting it working on those different levels. And one of the things that's been really fun knowing for a while that this was coming up is I have like huge amounts of gaps in terms of the Westerns that I've watched, and just watching Westerns to prepare myself to watch this, and like things like the moment where Winifred talks to her dead mother's grave. It's like, oh, I just saw this in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. But it's something that happens enough in films that whether you've specifically seen it in a film before or not, it still seems like it's like a very filmy thing to happen. It's a way of the character monologuing, but you can't just do a soliloquy in a film. Or you can, but it gives like a focus to it. So that's been cool. Going back to the dub and the languages in the American dub version, is that doctor character, does have a German accent. And they also give Tornado Lou it's slightly Marlene Dietrich, but it's more actually like Central Eastern European, and there's shades of, can't believe I'm Greta Garbo. It's like I'm drawing a blank on one of the most, and she even says, I need to be alone. I want to be alone at some point. So she just has that and Winifred makes a crack about her like wearing like foreign perfume. So there's this kind of, this sort of satire of xenophobia as well, because she's like the exotic, like foreign woman, the sort of and I think even Doug actually calls her like a femme fatale at one point. So it's playing on that as well. It's not even just playing on Westerns. There's a sort of noir and horror thing off to the side as well.
There was something from 1999 that I've been trying to find more details about called Radio Lemonade Joe. And it says that it was a documentary. And at first I thought it was about, there was apparently a radio show called Radio Lemonade Joe, but it says that either Karel Fiala was in it or maybe it's archive footage, but I really wish I knew a little bit more about that. And then I didn't know the whole thing with, who was it? Oh, Gorbachev and Lemonade Joe.
Oh yeah. Yeah. About wasn't it the attempt to, it was like a campaign against drinking, wasn't it, I think, in Russia?
Yeah, alcoholism was just absolutely like rampant in the Soviet Union, because much as this film satirizes capitalism, like communism in the form it appears there is pretty grim at times. So you had a lot of people like, that being a coping mechanism. So that was very early in his premiership, like because he took over in 85, and he was called both Lemonade Joe in reference to this film, which means it obviously travelled within the Eastern Bloc. But the other thing he was called was the Mineral Secretary, a parody on his actual job title of General Secretary. It's actually, as an aside, like one of the reasons that Russia did, like Imperial Russia did so badly in the First World War, is alcohol related, was that the state thought that it's wartime, we can't afford to have everyone just being drunk all the time. So they like banned the sale of vodka, except like taxes on vodka were just a massive revenue generator for the state. So when they just turned the vodka taps off, suddenly they just like, oh, all this money we could rely on in the budget is now gone. What do we do? So it's kind of like best laid plans. and I suppose that speaks to how badly prohibition worked in the States. It's just like, yeah, banning things, you could try, but there's always the law of unintended consequences.
Which I never understood why people are so up in arms and just the whole temperance movement. I'm just like, are you just trying to impose your moral values on other people? Oh, yeah. Okay. I guess that's what Americans do.
Genuinely, though, is just because when people say, what time in history would you really not want to live in? Most people would answer like the medieval period. My answer would probably be the 19th century, because if you like life as a agricultural like peasant, really tough. You're probably not going to live to a normal life expectancy, but at least you're outside in the fresh air. Whereas like when those like agricultural jobs start to go away, and because you've got mechanization and you have to move to the city and live in a slum and work in like a factory for 16 hours a day, and like alcoholism again was absolutely rampant. And so because people like men were having a terrible time at their jobs and like self-medicating with like gin and spirits and then just like taking out their anger on their partners, there was a reason that like the temperance movement was taken up, even if the cure was misguided. There was definitely like a lot of suffering that it was coming out of, and that was why it was like embraced with the fervor that it wasn't purely just being like busybodies. It was like responding to like just horrible circumstances out in the world, and yeah, thinking that was the cure.
I think there's a famous account by Engels, isn't there, about Manchester in the 19th century and just the sort of like the depth of alcohol. I'm from Manchester, so I can say this, and that people would say it's maybe not changed that much, but yeah, I think he talks about that, about how drunk people were, and I guess this is, the height of the sort of industrial factory system, and yeah, as you say, it was responding to this, very squalid, unpleasant reality.
Yeah, of just going, how can we make sure that we keep our margins like as huge as we can? And how do we do that? We just make wages microscopic and just pay people just enough to stay alive, and that's it.
Sounds like 2025 and talking about American middle class. Yes.
In the UK, we're still recovering from 15 years of the Tories just being like, let's just asset strip this country again. And we still hadn't recovered from the last time they did that. And yeah, the Labour Party, in order to stay in with the media, it's not even stay in, it's like they hate you. They just, you can't placate them. They're just being like way more right wing than they should be. Sorry, I'll stop editorializing and we'll go back to talking about the film. This film does have a timeless quality in terms of big business and putting profits ahead of people. Not always good. Not always good.
Because I think that line is really telling, isn't he, where he says, the law comes with me, or I think in Czech it's "som mnou přijde zákon," so it's literally the law comes with me, but it's like I am the law, isn't it, I think? And
it's basically Judge Dredd.
I seem to remember in The Wild Bunch there is a character who is, I think he's the railroad, it's like the big railroad magnate in The Wild Bunch, and I think says a very similar thing, doesn't he? This is, I represent the law, I think. And again, there's this similar kind of conflation of, big business, of economic interest with politics and with government. And
just being hand
This
in
film
glove.
was doing the same.
It's no small coincidence that you watched Once Upon a Time in the West right after this one, Ali. So, like, that whole thing with the railroad coming through and just taking away the mythology of the West, the whole thing of harmonica and Cheyenne, basically, they were gods that had no place on Earth anymore.
Both of these films reference the great train robbery in that shooting at the screen scene that you get. And that, like, we, the audience, are literally being shot by the gunman on screen. So there's, like a thing about gun violence as well in this film, which, again, sadly, perennial / evergreen theme.
It is interesting, isn't it, that I suppose this binary of the good and the bad, or it's like the sort of black and white, the sort of hero and villain, that's very much kind of key to the sort of Western iconography. And yet the thing that actually like undermines that is capitalism itself, isn't it? Because capitalism is amoral, and by the end of the film, that is the thing. It's the force of the business interests that have brought these two things together. And going back to the phrase hand in glove, it just reminds me of the fact that literally that's what you see, isn't it? When the two hands...
Yeah, which is ironic. And then, of course, the Czechs and Slovaks themselves, with their history, have strong perspectives on imperialism. So they're very able to call out, like, in this film, when the Americans are doing it, but there's also a by implication. Yeah, we've dealt with this both in our history with the Austrians and the Germans, and like right now with the Soviets, just being like, no, you're a free, independent socialist republic that better do what they're told.
Because I think there is a line in one of the songs, I think it's in the Arizona song in the Kolalok Saloon, where I think Winifred sings something about something being in the name of progress. And that, to me, that reference to progress, that does sound very much in line with the kind of Soviet discourse. I think that, we're progressing. It's all about this great socialist progressive future, which of course was the way that they would justify colonization. And it's just one of those, I can't remember how they translate it, but it's definitely there, which is, I think there is a few little jabs like that. I don't know how much we can spoil the ending, but I just love the idea that something can be like non-alcoholic and alcoholic at the same time.
For both teetotalers and alcoholics. And it reminds me of Patrick Bateman, because it's like, I'm in mergers and acquisitions.
There's an earlier line where Hogofogo says, I think he says, in small quantities, alcohol can be beneficial in any quantity. And that's just, that to me beats the line. There's that famous line in Anchorman, isn't there, that 60% of the time it works all of the time. And to me, I think Hogofogo's, it's slightly better. I think it's a slightly better formulation of the same idea. I think that, in small quantities, it's good in any quantity.
Cola Loco can bring you back from the dead.
The killing of Lemonade Joe is just surprisingly brutal. Hogofogo just keeps shooting him. It's just, stop, he's already dead. And then his corpse is just smoke coming off it. And I meant to pause it and count how many bullet holes he has in his torso, but it's just like a lot. And the end is just like an orgy of violence. It's like the end of Hamlet, except just played for laughs.
It just goes berserk, doesn't it, as well? And then there's all those things. They find gold, they find oil. It's like
a hat on top of a hat, except of course it's a cowboy hat.
Oil!
It's gold.
Mr. Kololoka, hear me, Mr. Kololoka. Your stocks have gone up over 5 million.
Billion.
Billion. Evil has been vanquished by our good nurse. He could be right. I'm tempted to stop being an outlaw.
My cane, I found gold. I found oil. Oh, look at this rock.
And Doug stabs his brother in the back with a corkscrew to tie it back in with the alcohol, and it just winds it up.
And then he turns around,
Looks like he shoots Joe 10 times. Speaking of John Woo, he's doing the double gun thing. Like, multiple times after he sprays him in the face with champagne, which is what eventually helps defeat him. And all the times that Joe gets, or other people, but especially Joe, get poisoned or take a drink of a Mickey, it's just incredible. It's, oh, here you go, Joe. Here's some Cola Loca. Okay, great. Just right down the hatch.
Brilliant pratfalls as well, I think. Some of the pratfalls are amazing, aren't they? They're just like perfectly stiffly fold back like that.
Yeah, pulling the tablecloth with him as he goes back from the poker table. So then you get that nice shot of all those bullet holes that Ellie was talking about.
And we didn't mention like some of the excellent like prop work that I keep forgetting the name of the actor, the Hogofogo actor, does with his fake arms, like after he's dispatched the sheriff brutally, and he's just using them to do all these gestures and just kind of, and yeah, Winifred walks in and he just like touches his mouth,
picks up a flower.
It's just excellent prop work.
And the dummy as well, that when Joe's just like throwing him around, and it's just that it just cuts between. It's obviously, I mean, they want you to know that it's a dummy, don't they? And then it cuts to him, and it's actually the actor, and he's just like spinning around, and you see it like with his head back. And I love dummies. That's another kind of slightly Python-esque. Or even the goodies, actually, even something as silly as that. I think I just love like dummies in films.
I love when he's playing cards with Joe towards the end, and he's trying to find those aces that he has in his pocket at all times. And just keeps pulling things out of his pockets. And at one point he pulls yet another rabbit out and puts it on the table. And Joe's just like, oh, very nice, very nice. Starts applauding him.
That's also very Harpo-esque, isn't it? And I think, there's the scene when Joe picks him up and then all the things come out of his pockets. And his pockets are just like full of just like endless props and magic tricks.
Yeah,
and
non-Euclidean
cards and
pockets.
Flowers.
Yeah.
It's Gallifreyan technology. I love this movie so much, and I just wish more people had the opportunity to see it. I know that there is a really nice Blu-ray, the one that you've been talking about, Allie, with the English dub on there. I still have an older Blu-ray that I picked up. I don't know, or it might be DVD these days. Years ago, I picked that one up. So it's such a great movie. And like I said, I was so surprised that it came out on that Facets label, but I really hope that they're not really doing too much anymore. I hope that another company picks it up and does a re-release. I'm surprised that Second Run hasn't put this out again recently.
Yeah, I was going to say them because they release so much Czech stuff, but also it feels like a very Deaf Crocodile type of film.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Because Deaf Crocodile already has the other two, doesn't it? So yeah, we need the first one to make it complete.
It was very briefly on the BFI player last year. It was like there was about like a month or less, and then it disappeared. And I wondered did it get pulled because of the blackface, which of course is egregious, but it seems like the sort of thing where just put up front, yeah, no going in. This has this in it, but you can still see it. But I don't know.
Apparently it's available for rent or to purchase on Amazon Prime. Not that I want to give those guys any money.
Speaking of capitalists,
$5. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Jeez. And yeah, there is a DVD available on Amazon, the Facets DVD, for $76.99, or you can go to eBay and find a much cheaper copy, the import version. Yeah. Czechmovie.com, or I think it's .com, has that as well. The more better version.
Yeah, mine was an eBay purchase. Like, I was looking at getting it imported, but because of Brexit, we have to pay import duties because that was a great idea.
Well, luckily over here, we have all these tariffs in place, so we're able to just get things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just really reducing the price for the consumer, because that's how tariffs work.
But it's all right, because the other countries are going to pay it all, aren't they?
Yeah, Mexico's going to pay for the wall. You guys are going to pay for my breakfast this morning. It's fantastic. All right, man, how do we keep coming back to capitalism in this movie, right?
Who knows? It's almost as if they've made an evergreen film. I was going to briefly say we have a Mexican character, because one of the two henchmen is very much like Mexican costumed, even down to the sombrero with the skulls on it. And yeah, he's dispatched brutally by Tornado Lou.
I think that's the Karel Effer, isn't it, playing the... is he called the Pancho Kid, I think?
Yeah, there's the Coyote Kid and the Pancho Kid, yeah.
And then the Coyote Kid is the Valdemar Matuška, who was a very popular singer. And actually, he did a great Czech version of Rhinestone Cowboy in the 70s. So if you're looking for like a musical accompaniment to this podcast, there is a nice version called, I think it's called To Jsem já ten Kovboj, but it's spelled Kov, the Czech way, Kovboj, Kovboj. So yeah, that's a nice version.
I have a feeling we're going to go out on the English version of the Lemonade Joe song from that dub.
It's such an earworm. It's just been rattling around so much like the last week.
I wish there was a soundtrack available for it. There is a soundtrack available for the Czech version that you can get over on supraonline.cz. Highly recommended that site. And I think you can just translate it through like your web browser. You don't necessarily have to, they don't have a language changer on there, but yeah, a lot of good things available on Suprafonline. I know I'm butchering the name of it. All right, let's go ahead and take a break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages. Looking for something superior to streaming? A place with more than 5 times the selection available on all streaming services combined? Check out Scarecrow Video's Rent by Mail service. Select from an unparalleled collection of over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Get in on it now at scarecrow.com and rediscover the wonders of physical media.
Setkání s láskou.
Nechcete se smát?
Třeba. Náhlá smrt blízkého člověka.
Co je s tatínkem?
A bolestná ztráta nadějí.
Vylez!
Poetický filmový příběh Romance pro křídlovku. V úterý ve 20 hodin na CS Filmu.
That's right. We'll be back next week with a look at Otakar Vavra's Romance for Bugle. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts Alistair and Jonathan. Jonathan, what is the latest with you, sir?
I've got a couple of things that I've contributed to that are coming out soon. So there's the release from second run of Who Wants to Kill Jesse, which I'm really excited about. And our projection booth commentary is on there. I have an essay as well in the booklet, and I think that's meant to be out at the end of August, so probably will be out by the time this episode comes out. And then I've also got an essay in the Radiance release of the film Malpertuis, the great Harry Kemmel film, which again, I'm just so excited that this is being released now because it's such a great film. So I've got an essay on that on Harry Kemmel's short films, and I think that's coming out in October this year. I also wrote an essay for the Deaf Crocodile release of Jiří Brdečka's short films plus the Pied Piper. So there's a nice deluxe edition of his animated films which came out recently. Yeah, I have an essay in the deluxe edition of that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I am so glad that they're putting out Malpertuis again, because I think we covered that that was last Shocktober we discussed that, and such a fascinating film, and I'm so glad that you are taking part in that release because I'm sure you've got some great things to say about it. And Allie, how about yourself?
So speaking of the vicissitudes of capitalism, it's like Mike's like, he's gonna start plugging the Communist Party. No, I'm not going to do that. So where I grew up, Milton Keynes had the first multiplex cinema in the UK, The Point, and sadly is owned by a property developer, and so it's going to be demolished very soon. And so an article I wrote for Film Stories magazine is very recently being published in an online form, so I can put that in the show notes, about why the places that we go to watch films matter and should be preserved as part of history just as much as some other things that tend to get preserved. So that's a recent thing for me. I've started to do more film screening intros. Most recently, I introduced Clueless as part of a Jane Austen adaptations season I co-curated with the Ultimate Picture Palace in Oxford, where I live. So that was an absolute blast doing that. Love that film so much. And speaking of satire, it's so sharp. Takes a slightly more benign view of the rich, but that's like more rich people should be like Cher, like a bit clueless, but essentially like heart in the right place. So that was a joy seeing that on the big screen for the first time as well. And then otherwise, like I've been on this show quite a few times. So yeah, dive into the back catalogue and listen to the Zero Grad episode if you haven't already, or the Amphibian Man episode, or the Kira Muratova ones, or Welcome or No Trespassing, speaking of satire. Yeah, and then I'm still doing my show, a Russian and Soviet movie podcast. My most recent episode was on Ballad of a Soldier, which is a Criterion Collection film. And that was, speaking of films that are evergreen in their themes, with it being so much about war and the young being like thrown into the meat grinder. It's just, I wish this wasn't relevant anymore, and yet. So yeah, that's me, and probably like the most compact way of finding me on the internet is just looking at my link tree, which is Ali_Pitts. That's ALLY_PITTS. Yeah, and that's me.
Well, I will be sure to link to that in the show notes. And as we head out, I want to say thanks so much, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Do you want to support physical media and get great movies in the mail? Head over to scarecrow.com and try Scarecrow Video's incredible rent by mail service. It's the largest publicly accessible collection in the world. You will find films there entirely unavailable elsewhere. Get what you want when you want it without the scrolling, and you better believe that Lemonade Joe is available. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
I see a tear in your eye, little pony, 'cause you're so proud of me. When we ride through town and a tear comes down, it's plain horse sense to see. You're so proud to have me on your back, 'cause goodness is my aim. So let the bad men try, let the bad men die, 'cause they're no match for a clean living guy. And Lemonade Joe's my name. Lemonade Joe's my name. I'm so bright and shiny like the noonday sun. I bathe after every meal. The barroom floozies want my heart, but I offer another deal. I hand them a bottle of my lemonade for the sick and spiritually lame. So let the bad men die, let the bad men die, 'cause they're no match for a clean living guy. And Lemonade Joe's my name. Lemonade Joe's my name. Yes, I'm a born leader, so follow me. Get on the wagon of the lemonade train. And let the bad men try, let the bad men die, 'cause they're no match for a clean living guy. And Lemonade Joe's my name. Lemonade Joe's my name.
Pak jste limonádový, jo?
No a?
Dvakrát!
Ať Jan z autodá, bím bam.
So far to you I may, for tonight me to say, carajo verá. On my day, say I to you, I may so far me to say, holy star, on my way do I say to my valley, do I lay so gay. So far, me to say, holy star, on my way do I say to my valley, do I lay so gay, goodbye.
Když cílí limonádový joe, pak již není třeba volat lékaře. A propos, píše se rok 1880 a my prožíváme nejskvělejší střeleckou sezónu našeho zlatého divokého západu.
Co je to za hluk? Nějaká hádka, mám pocit, že snad toho bylo dost. Těch hloupých vtipů tu byla celá řádka a já už začínám mít trochu zlost. Zdá se, že někdo tu urazil dámu, i když snad byla trochu pod vlivem. No tak si seberte svý kamarády a běžte si to pěkně vyřídit ven. Tady bude klid a mír. Jsem tu já a se mnou zákon. A když jsem tady, tak aby bylo jasné, není tu místa pro smutek a žal. Jen hlavu vzhůru a zase bude krásně a všechno může klidně běžet dál. Ten hlupák věří, že černá je bílá a že si může dělat, co si vzpomene. Jen Kolaloka je ta pravá síla. Co na to říkáš, Dagu Badmane? Tady bude klid a mír. Jsem tu já, se mnou zákon. všech čertů, padouchy já drtím velmi rád. Když je to třeba, tak neznám žertů, i když se umím tak hezky smát. Nejvíc mě trápí to věčné kdyby, a proto říkám, je to tak. nedělám chyby a doufám, že už je to znát. Tady bude klid a mír. Jsem tu já a se mnou zákon.
Světem si chodím, hledám nebe na zemi. Pokoj si nikdy nedám, věřte mi. Posel světla hledat štěstí, nezastavím na rozcestí. Jsem malý Joe, tak prosím, pomozte mi. Objevím se z nenadání, nikdy nelžu, nepodvádím, možná se to jenom zdá, ale kdo to má tak jako já, tak jako já, tak jako já, tak jako já. Světem si chodím, hledám nebe na zemi. Kdo mě ztratí, marně volá, vrať se mi. Zavřené otevírám, nikdy nespím, neumírám. Jsem malý Joe, tak prosím, pomozte mi. Objevím se z nenadání, nikdy nelžu, nepodvádím, možná se to jenom zdá, ale kdo to má tak jako já, 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 jako já.
Potloukám sem a tam, nemám ani s kým jít a kam. Už z paměti znám tady jména všech tříd a parků. Z mých vonavých dní zbyl jen pach, svůj osud jako stepní prach vleču dál na patách. Co pak tu vůbec někdo tuší, že bych popsal dál ďáblu duši, abych jak se má a sluší až ke hvězdám sám. To jsem já, ten cowboy, co mu riziko je hrou, že ho svou ke všem rodeum. To jsem já, ten cowboy, co mu hvězdná sláva bariér nahradila tátu dům a tvrdě platí daň svým snům. Mně už nevadí tak, že mám hlad, že jen z dobrodiní mám kde spát a že záplaty v šatech svou po jehle snití. To já spíš teď mívám strach, že nezahlídnu včas ten práh nadějí v temnotách. Co pak já vím v téhle chvíli, jestli mám jak dřív dost síly, abych se svý herky bílý až ke hvězdám sáhl. To jsem já, ten cowboy, co mu riziko je hrou, že ho zvou ke všem rodeum. To jsem já, ten cowboy, co mu hvězdná sláva bariér nahradila tátu dům a tvrdě platí daň svým snům. To jsem já, ten cowboy, co mu riziko je hrou, že ho zvou ke všem rodeum. To jsem já, ten cowboy, co mu hvězdná sláva bariér nahradila tátu.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.